We made it to our settlement without issue. With our uniforms soaked through, the washing detachments would have a field day. The early morning light began to peek over the trees that surrounded our little imitation of home. The column broke apart, our porters hefting our ill-gotten gains into my cabin. I let the men walk with what they could keep on their person, but anything that needed more than one man to be transported would become Crown property. Moltke believed that to be exceedingly fair. Entering into the cabin, one was greeted with a great feast laid out on the table. I ignored it and proceeded upstairs to disrobe. The staff offered to draw me a bath. I ignored them. I appreciated their willingness to provide the comforts of home, but I lacked desire for anything but bed rest. Sintra hadn't made an appearance yet, but I'm sure she would soon. I set the note destined for her on my nightstand. Now, a final cigarette and a restful sleep. Untroubled dreams, surprisingly. I awoke at what I believed to be the next morning, but as my staff had left 4 entire trays outside my door, it must have been the following day. I rose, albeit bearing an ache from the strains of the prior day's events, and opened the window to take in some fresh air. The turnaround has been miraculous. I could see some familiar faces milling about the camp. I called to them and asked them to spread the word that a 2-day rest and recreation would be allocated. I dressed in my leisure clothes. No sense in donning a uniform with the men at rest. I struck out from the cabin after grabbing a biscuit from one of the trays near my door. Within my mind, I ordered the priorities. First, a necessary call on the command to ensure that affairs for the men killed in action were being handled. Then, have Diesel's contingent and the relevant personnel pass through the loot taken from Aram, which now occupied most of the space in the cabin across from mine. Finally, pass on that message from Sintra's father to the woman herself, if I could find her. Walking down towards the command tent, still encapsulated by the shadow of our dirigible, which I believe would soon depart for the surface, I found the appropriate measures had been taken. Within, on a series of tables, the machinery of the mortuary forms ran with a detached smoothness. Our identification papers and crack plates formed a neat stack on the first table, where a lower officer would match the service number to the name, and pass this on to the fellow seated to his left. This fellow would read out the name, and all other critical information, to another officer seated in front of either a typewriter or a pen and paper, who, in turn, would begin writing those dreadful letters. Dear Madam Herr Simon, and so on. With a letter in hand, the fellow from the postmaster's office would then take it, apply the appropriate seals and stamps, and add it to a neat pile. Grim. No other word for it, though there was some relief in knowing that family members would get closure, for all the good that it did them. I found Moltke seated at his desk. He had always taken it upon himself to write the letters for those officers lost in action, a quiet dignity to his process, now interrupted by my presence as he turned from his desk and greeted me.
Your Majesty.
Major General.
Is there something I can do for you?
I came to inquire as to the arrangements for burial of the fallen men.
Indeed. The surveyors began clearing a plot yesterday morning. It should be sufficient. The chaplains will be pulling double duty, but none complained about it. The officers are drawing up letters to families. Everything seems well in order.
Good. Did you need assistance with composing?
I'll happily take His Majesty's signature on these. Royal recognition does little to abate the grief at losing a son, brother, or father, but it may help.
Then hand me a pen. We sat and performed this solemn duty for an hour, and in short order. There are always fewer casualties amongst the command, but rarely were there 0. As we sanded the last bit of ink, I asked that we come up with a name for the new resting place of these brave men. We settled on Krieger Friedhof. Moltke's creative strain seemed to drain away from him, and I couldn't come up with anything better. With this matter resolved, I moved on to the next. A large crowd of the men had developed around my cabin, some exhibiting those strange trinkets that they had retrieved from the now destroyed city. The primary concern they had would be whether or not those items that had been taken from them would either be returned to their claimants or be equally divided among the expeditionary contingent. Addressing them from the boarded porch, I instructed them that they would have a decision before the end of the day, insofar as distribution was concerned, but that the Crown reserved the right to retain items of particular importance. This got them to disperse, albeit grumbling. I entered, and my impromptu staff for this strange inventory taking were already in situ. Diesel and his cronies were all seated at the table and gave the customary greeting. I returned it. I took my natural seat at the head of the table, flanked by our greatest mind and some good ones.
Your Majesty, I must preface this activity with which we will undertake with a critical clarification.
Proceed then, Herr Diesel.
While we are men of science, accurate identification of these items will take a great deal of time, and the great specter of the unknown looms large above us. We took the liberty to open some of the containers and inspect them carefully for any thief-proofing or countermeasures. All but one proved to be simple to disarm. I've taken the problematic example into my possession for more intricate study.
I have no objection to this. Is there anything else?
We did consider consulting the members of our profession in Paris and New Kirkwall via telegraph, but I insisted that we wait for His Majesty's permission.
I appreciate your patience. Your request is denied until you smart fellows truly admit to being stumped by some tribal fetishes and trinkets. If obstacles arise, outbound communications regarding specific cases will be permitted.
Thank you, Your Majesty.
We began in an ordered measure. On the matter of objects retrieved that were too large for the men to squirrel away, we were able to identify the following. 1 diamond, facet cut, around the size of a man's closed fist. Several pairs of antique dueling pistols with a French maker's mark. 5 liters of Merovingian honey, stored in fired clay pots, enameled. 1 dozen metallic palanquins, inscribed with the Yazata language. 1 wooden box of strange, shriveled blue flesh, likely tongues. 1 solid gold spittoon, encrusted in precious gems. 12 pounds of what appeared to be a silver ore, later identified to be titanium. 10 pounds of glowing purple crystals. 4 sealed glass jars of a viscous green liquid produced a rancid smell. A plethora of woven tapestries, which appeared to be made of spider silk, depicting the history of the primitives. 1 badge of the Parisian gendarmerie. 1 jawbone, the full height of a man, of a large fish or reptile, featuring fossilized serrated teeth. 2 oriental swords, lacquered and patterned in red. 1 large stone statue depicting, presumably, their chief deity. 7 spears tipped in bronze, broad-pointed and sharp beyond belief. 2 orbs of polished volcanic glass with channels carved into the surface. 500 pounds of orichalcum formed in ingots, bearing the mark AM. 1 set of English porcelain, including a tea set, no monogram, with a gilded edging. 27 bone charms, varying in size, bearing black markings. 1 mummified foot, preserved in a clear liquid within a blue glass vase. 3 living pterosaurs, young specimens, sex as of yet undetermined. 4 ceramic jars of tarantulas, living. 1 dozen bottles of champagne, 1867 year, Balling. 5 silver engravings in high relief, 1 meter in width and 2 meters in height, presumably of notable aristocrats or historical figures. 500 pounds of gold and 2,550 pounds of silver. A treasure trove indeed. To satisfy our obligations to the men, I instructed that the gold and silver, which took the form of coins and ingots, be weighed and distributed with equal measure to the men. That should put an end to their grumbling. The ores and other metallurgical material would be passed on to Diesel's team for examination. As for the remaining items, we dispatched a telegram to the Imperial Museum in Berlin to determine the best course of action. Until we received a response, the cabin reserved for dignitaries would act as an ad hoc storehouse. Another task completed. Now to the worst. I grabbed another biscuit from the baking tray in the kitchen and stepped out. In the fashion of my earlier proclamation from the window, I bid the nearest man approach and instructed him to inform others that they would receive a portion of the precious metals as recompense for their bravery. Before I released him, I inquired if he had seen our primitive guest. He shrugged and gave no indication that he knew of her whereabouts. Pacing through the settlement revealed very little. Inquiries were made, but no answers were to be had. Insofar as the rumors told, she had disappeared from the camp shortly after we marched out for the punitive. I was confident she hadn't followed us out, as our men would have attempted to identify and apprehend her. That wasn't abnormal for her, at least. I was confident that she would reappear, and my confidence was not misplaced. After dining in solitude and addressing some of the outstanding communications with Heinrich as my seal-bearer, I made the sojourn to my chambers for a night of restful sleep. I opened the door and there she was, just as God made her.
Prince needs conqueror's welcome.
She embraced me, and just as Paris and Helen, things escalated quickly. Another gripping, writhing, sweating, ecstatic rendezvous. We were catching our breath when I recalled my purpose with her. I reached over to retrieve the note, but it wasn't there.
Prince needs this?
She produced the parchment from beneath my pillow. Whatever it was, it didn't deter her from physical interaction. Perhaps it gave her closure. Now all that needed to be done was to never describe the events of the last 3 days with her. But this I knew to be impossible. You needed this from your father.
I know. I read it.
What does it say?
Says I am queen.
Of an ash heap, maybe. Excellent. I am happy for you. She leaned into me. Even being gone for just 2 days made me miss her warmth.
Prince wants celebration?
Didn't we just celebrate?
No. Celebrate for me.
Royalty demanding a party then?
No party. Just Prince.
Hard to refuse, given the circumstances. When the time comes to explain what we had done to her former home, there would be significant difficulties. Perhaps it would be best if we acquiesced to her demands. I knew the men wouldn't give in to a more public event, but that was for the best. This remained an illicit affair, and eventually it would need to end. If only I knew how quickly that end would come. As Her Highness wishes. I gave a wry smile, and the dance started again. For the last time. It didn't prove as difficult as I had imagined to coax our chef and the staff into creating a little celebratory dinner for Sintra and I. A couple of eyes rolled when I suggested there were now 2 royals about the camp, but they folded when I insisted that they had been able to laze away while the punitive expedition took place, and they needed to maintain good form for when we received actual dignitaries. It was a Sunday, and the commotion that regularly characterized the camp desisted. A rest day after all. The progress of the new cemetery was being made, and one could see some of the men and the civilians, arm in arm, preparing for the excavation of graves. A terrible pair of words, that is, new cemetery. It was work that needed to be done. If they proceeded with burials today, I would have to postpone my liaison with Sintra. I felt compelled to attend. Diesel's men continued to move the heavier objects acquired from our latest venture into the cabin across the way. The jawbone proved particularly difficult to get past the door jamb. Most of the men, enjoying their time of relief, played games of football or took up morning prayers with the chaplains. All seemed well. I departed from the cabin and found Heinrich staring at the men engaging in a five-a-side. His strange eyes followed the ball from one end of the improvised chalk-lined field to the other. After my little hallucination several days ago, I had grown reluctant to spend time near him. Never having shared my experience with the others, they remained blissfully ignorant of the working of his mind. I resolved to let the matter drop and see if I could divine some other use for him. The game continued as I approached. Artillery crew versus the telegraph men. There didn't seem to be a score tallied, and an inquiry revealed that they were tied 0-0. No surprise. One side is hulking fellows ill-suited for the rapid movements the game required, and the other is sedentary desk lickers. Not exemplary replications of our national team, but something that turned the men's attention away from the dreary duties and dangers that surrounded them. Heinrich continued his intent observations. With his eyes set so close to the sides of his head, he didn't need to turn to follow each play. The suggestion needed to be made. Perhaps you should teach him to play. The men stopped and turned towards our good guild friend. The chief of number 5 battery, who had retained possession of the ball, now kicked it over to him. He kicked it back. Lovely. The fellow acting as striker for the telegraph men sat out for a moment while Heinrich began to pick up a new sport. He was clumsy, undoubtedly, but he picked up the game quite well. That squelching that always accompanied his footsteps was dampened by the sand, and his spindly limbs gave the men some difficulty in reading and anticipating his next movement. Content to know I had introduced a new brand of hooliganism to the denizens of the deep, I moved along. Down towards our pier, another U-boat had arrived bearing supplies. No guessing games this time. The men were content to rest and not badger the sailors. Tirpitz stood nearby, directing the movement of the sea cranes and the extraction of our invaluable supplies. Far be it from me to interrupt naval maneuvers. Not my specialty, despite my love for the sea. I withheld luncheon from myself to drive an appetite that would be necessary for this little engagement Sintra desired. Instead, I paid a visit to Diesel, from whose tent white vapors seemed to be flowing. It wasn't a fire as near as I could tell, but whatever it was would be worth investigating just to prevent the unnecessary formation of a bucket chain. He greeted me properly as I entered, stopping mid-cackle, from behind those thick goggles, hefting a beaker of some terrible liquid from his workbench and down towards an iron box. Good God! A rasping cough emerged from me. What in God's name are you doing in here?
Furthering scientific progress, Your Majesty.
Does scientific progress smell this awful?
On occasion, when close to a critical breakthrough, the most unexpected results tend to reveal themselves.
He closed the iron box that now contained the bubbling concoction and peeled his goggles from his face.
His Majesty should be proud to know that I have successfully applied a high-strength acid to that chest that proved so troublesome to open. The substance you smell is that which was contained within. It appears similar to petroleum distillates and burns at high temperatures.
You've rediscovered oil. Well done, I suppose.
I'm afraid His Majesty misunderstands. This material is far more viscous. While the high flammability is indicated by our current understanding of petroleum, the viscosity allows it to be subject to high-pressure environments without separating into its constituent elements. It would also seem to stick like tree sap to surfaces on which it is applied.
Fascinating indeed. Can you stem the smell? I anticipate some complaints from the men if it persists.
I am happy to have further analysis take place at a remote location.
That would be preferable, certainly. If you have any further breakthroughs, please send a note rather than presenting me with it in person if it features this kind of stench.
As His Majesty desires.
For fear that the odor would permeate my clothes, I left him to his business. The day began to wind down, and the evening reared its head. Time for a party. Less of a party, and more of a courtly engagement. Courtly, or courting. In any case, the staff were successful in preparing something palatable, a traditional 4 courses. One of them must have made some Faustian bargain with Tirpitz and his dragon's hoard of good champagne, as we were presented with an aged Bollinger, a good meal to end a good day. It felt appropriate to change clothes. Dining with royalty is a formal occasion after all. The laundress must have anticipated this, and my white dress uniform was properly pressed. Out of habit, I donned my holster. There didn't seem to be a rational need for it, but instinct governed my decision. The table was set with all the finery that could have graced the dining halls in Charlottenburg. Someone had even gone so far as to rustle up a golden candelabra. From where, I had no notion. We appreciated the gesture anyway. I stood out on the porch as the evening swept over camp, one more cigarette before dinner. Were it not for our dirigible's departure yesterday, I would have assumed that its shadow was the cause of the darkness. The gas lanterns from the nearest cabins, Diesel's laboratory, and the telegraph office flickered through the panes of the windows. The drone of the insects and the lapping of the surf against the nearby beach apprised us of a peaceful atmosphere. In stark contrast to the trials and travails that brought us here, all was well. Flicking the filter away now that I had finished, I came through the door just as Sintra began her descent down the stairs, radiant as ever. That same azure gown that she donned at the Colonel's soiree. She painted herself again, those eggshell-colored marks and lines running across her face, down her arms, those bizarre tribal symbols terminating on her flesh now concealed by her white gloves. The staff were so good as to pull her chair for her, and we took our seats. First, a splash of champagne to loosen the tongues, as if I wasn't already familiar with hers and she with mine. The clinking of the bottle punctuated the space between hearty laughter. The fragrances emanating from the kitchen did inspire salivation. The day had been inorganized by order of priority. This dinner should follow that pattern. First things first. A toast to the coronation of Her Highness, Queen Sintra of Erum, heir of the Yazata of Living Earth. A mild applause came from behind the kitchen door, but she appeared satisfied with that as an inauguration to the meal.
Prince does honor.
Prince does his best. On came the first course, as was proper, a series of more light fare. There was still that nervous reluctance within her, as it pertained to the selection of the correct fork, an adorable little fear. Eventually she chose correctly. In line with the comedic mood of the evening, I could not resist furthering the joke. What shall be the first act of Her Majesty's reign? She finished chewing and gave an interesting response.
Search for new king.
Well, what is a queen without a king? A pregnant pause.
Lonely.
I took up my chalice and endeavored to drain it before furthering the conversation. Do you feel different, Your Majesty?
Different?
Now that you bear a crown?
No. Feels the same. Same love. Same fear.
Love of what?
You.
One could hear an iron pan drop and skid across the floor just behind the kitchen door. Let's move on. Quickly. Fear of what?
Power.
As I had grown to believe, she was a sharp attack than the impression made by her primitive bearing. I shared that fear. All monarchs or future monarchs do if they are wise. Quite a good soup, this. I beckoned the staff for a new bottle, and they obliged, damnable little bubbles rising from their golden ocean. Something erupted from the more juvenile area of my mind. I don't believe I've ever seen Sintra turn blue, in our parlance. In fact, I wasn't sure she had taken to drink at all. The champagne in her chalice slowly disappeared, so there wasn't an outright disdain. In Diesel's fashion, it was time for an experiment. I demanded another bottle be brought forth, and the deluge began. Making the request of her was quite simple. I gestured towards my glass. Try and keep up, my dear. Attempting to play on that combative tribal spirit of competition proved to be the best approach. She played into my little trap, one bottle down. Then the next bit of fare arrived. I could only assume it was a goose previously, properly roast with a crispy brown skin, glaze of orange. The staff began carving. Sintra took up the dropped torch of conversation.
Will Prince stay once City is finished?
I'm afraid not. When we complete construction, there will be no need for royal oversight. I will return to our capital up above.
Tell me of capital, Prince.
Where to begin? It is called Berlin. Hundreds of years ago, it was a small town inside a swamp. Our people drained the swamps and leveled the forests. It has been in my family's control for 300 years. Now it is the height of civilization. Great palaces, bustling streets, inviting markets.
I want to see.
I'm sure we have some photographs around here somewhere.
With my eyes, not others.
The twisting knife of mixed emotions dug deeper. I could never let that happen. If being cowed by the threat of exposure by that bomb back 3 days ago by pictorial blackmail inspired fear, pure terror enveloped me at the prospect of bringing Sintra to the surface. I could never risk so much just to satisfy her curiosity. You could. You might. She's royalty now. A diplomatic visit, perhaps? Stop it. Perhaps I would have to have King's approval. The bird was a bit dry, but the citrus glaze did salvage it. I desired for something to cut the sweetness, so I found that smoking would provide a solution while not filling the stomach. Donna would have never approved, but she wasn't here. Sintra participated. To my surprise, she produced a proper opera-length holder. Being a gentleman, I stood, approached her, mounted the cigarette in this lacquered extension, and lit her up. Where did you get that?
Sailor General gave to me before Prince left.
I should have known Tirpitz to be the provisioner of bad habits. Apparently that pan that we heard clattering to the ground earlier contained the final substantive course. The cooks emerged, eyes turned downward, and gave profuse apologies for the delay. I had no cause to chastise them, so we took the time to continue my little experiment. A second bottle now thumped against the table, emptied thoroughly. A third was procured in short order. I was beginning to feel the warmth, and Sintra's cheeks had flushed red. An interesting reaction, but not unheard of. I felt bold enough to test her language skills. Does Her Highness miss the sensation of flight?
Yes, wanted to go on your flying machine. Soldiers said no.
They were right to deny you. It isn't a place for a lady. She hummed at that. The delay that the indiscretion of the cooks had caused was soon corrected. Now came the conclusion. Sintra took the greatest interest. Women, savage or civilized, above or below, all take that same ravenous interest in sweets. A Battenberg cake, I believe, though I remained curious as to where the staff managed to source the necessary marzipan. Between the alcohol-inspired appetite and her natural propensities, she put down 3 or 4 slices of it before conceding defeat to the sugary opponent. Before the cake had cleared her mouth, she began a new set of demands.
Cook needs to make more of that.
I will ask him to do so. I leaned over the table and gave a coy whisper, to the health of Her Highness and her sweet tooth. The clink of the glasses provided all the fanfare that our little celebration required. Looking out as I set down my chalice, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A face in the window. Bombach. I drew my revolver and fired quicker than I had thought possible. The glass broke into a dozen shards, but I knew in my heart that I had missed. A scream now erupted from the kitchen. His escape of the prior day gave me cause, and the murder of that carriage driver gave me motivation. Now, the pursuit. One last loose end. I crashed through the door and sprinted to the back of the cabin. There, I could hear his footsteps trailing through the tree line and gave chase. You won't get away from me. As I ran, I stammered out what warning I could to those that could hear. We have an intruder! I should have called an alarm properly. I knew Sintra was behind me. I could hear her rapid, agile steps carrying on through the brush. This would end here. I was gaining on him, just as I had with that shit-eating photographer so long ago. The undergrowth grew thicker as we made distance from the settlement. The mud beneath my boots gave way to that sandstone plateaus that indicated we were traveling south. I could see him keeping a strong lead, growing ever weaker as my pace quickened. Pondering the options as to his identity did not fill me with confidence. If he was who he claimed he was, then there would be an extensive internal investigation to determine the truth, which, if the judiciary was, feeling particularly vindictive, could take a tremendous amount of time, and may result in those intimate photographs in his possession part of a public record. Doom. In the alternative, if he was, as I suspected, a spy for a rival power, we could have him shot in secret and disposed of without significant difficulty. Naturally, that would be preferable. Falkenhayn would finally be able to practice the arts he learned during his stint with the intelligence services, and we may be able to ascertain the identity of his masters. I would be unwilling to let him go, but we could use his capture as leverage in future dealings. While the cover of night obscured his outline, his movements were easy to track against the pale brown and red pigments of the stone beneath us. In an effort to increase my speed, I threw my holster off and let it drop to the ground. I could hear Sintra's cries for me to stop, but I ignored her. Whatever or whoever he is, it will be resolved tonight. In the distance, trumpets and whistles flared out, indicating that the men were making ready to respond to my calls. Nearing what was clearly the end of the line, as the plateau terminated into a steep drop, my target stopped dead in his tracks. My hand found his shoulder. Just before, Sintra's hand found mine. My grasp found no purchase in the flesh of a man. The figure collapsed, and my fingers wrapped around loose fabric, which collapsed in a sunken pile onto the ground. I stepped backwards as a high-pitched ringing entered my ears. From the pile, a ghastly gaseous cloud rose, glowing in the night like an oriental firework, its contours constantly pitching and rolling as it raised into the air. That bright shadow now enveloped us. I turned to Sintra, and the world flew past me. Time began to stretch and twist. From 1,000 pairs of eyes, I saw 1,000 lives in an instant. War and famine and plague and death. Peace and prosperity and progress and life. The future, the present and the past, ending in that enrapturing darkness. As quickly as it set upon me, it released my mind from its grasp, and I returned to myself. Slipping. A coast, a cliff, a sea. No jungle, no plateau, no Bombach. Realizing now that we were not where we were previously, I took hold of an outcropping and held onto it with all my strength. Now, we were situated on the face of a curved cliff, against whom a great black watery morass beat with towering waves. At this great height, I could smell the salt and the blood. My uniform now sported a significant gash across my right shoulder. How I had sustained an injury remained ambiguous. I dug my boot heels into the cliffside in a vain effort to stabilize myself. Wherever this place was, its steep slope made it exceedingly difficult to remain upright. Looking outwards, one could see that morass, really, an ocean, extending far out to the horizon. No clouds yet hung to conceal that bizarre red sky. No birdsong, no insects. Nothing but the pounding of the waves against the cliffs. Then I heard her. She appeared as if from nothing, unsteadily and slowly descending this rocky decline. Sintra was struggling to keep a grip on an outgrowth of roots just above me. Her grip slipped, and she came tumbling past me. I took a risk and reached out to catch her. I succeeded, at the cost of now endangering the both of us. I couldn't keep myself to my original position and was forced to slide further down the ridge towards that deadly precipice. We journeyed ever closer to the edge, the scraping of my hobnails, despite their intended purpose of great attraction, providing no relief to the oncoming danger. I managed to wrap my arm around another stony protrusion. She had nothing to grasp onto, and her legs now dangled over the edge. Taking in breath slowly to maintain my grip, an analysis of the situation provided no relief. If we were anywhere where someone could hear us, any cry for help would surely be stifled by the pounding waves. If we were not, there would be no sense in expending the energy, which was now desperately needed for me to ensure we did not fall any further. She was petite, thank God. If it was Moltke or Tirpitz that now encumbered my good arm, even if I had wished to keep hold, the physics of the matter would make it impossible. Despite this, the gash in my shoulder brought a burning pain that ensured my continued grip on her hand would slowly weaken. I could not bring myself to consider the unthinkable. I could not let her go this way. She said something to me, straining to be heard over the roaring surf. It was inaudible, but her movement brought my attention downwards. She repeated herself. Of all the things she ever said, her next words were the worst.
Let go.
No, never. I will not. I cannot.
Prince must.
My grip was beginning to fail me. I didn't have the strength to bring her up over the cliff. It would be one of us, or both of us. It should have been both. She took my eyes away from the precipice with a sultry voice, that pearlescent smile, and a relaxed look.
Prince, let go.
For the first time since coming to this place, suffering and enjoying each moment, watching the men and the nation prosper from our efforts, and fulfilling the mission assigned to me by God and Fatherland, I felt that I could let go. And I did. I watched her fall, smiling all the way. I watched her hit the water. When I was told that Sintra would be taken by someone stronger than myself, I never anticipated that the stronger party would be death. I watched her die, and a part of me died with her.